The Word, the Son of God himself, that is, also enjoyed playing in the earth, delighting to be among his creation. Leviathan was created to play in the earth, much as a child would play with and enjoy his toys, or as a collector would rejoice among his treasures. God created Lucifer originally to enjoy his creation, and as a father would be filled with joy just to watch his child open presents at Christmas, rejoicing and playing with every one of them. This is the concept that we get from Proverbs chapter 8, verses 30 through 31. God also originally created this creature Lucifer to play his music before him, to rejoice before his presence, as David and the minstrels of Israel did play and rejoice before God. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13, and 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 8. The attitude of Lucifer seems to have been much different in the early creation, for at that time there had been no sin. The original cherub Lucifer was created perfect in all his ways. His rejoicing in the Spirit and his playing before God was much like the biblical account of David, playing his music and dancing before him. For instance, in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 21. As David was selected to be the ruler over the people of God, Lucifer was also selected to be ruler over the inhabitants of God's first creation. Now, this extraordinary being, whom the Bible calls Lucifer, was originally created perfect. He was without spot or blemish in the eyes of God. He was not then created as a loathsome creature we usually imagine him to be when we imagine or think of him as the devil. This mighty cherub had not been created sinful, but rather by his own choice he became sinful. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 15. This perfect angelic creature, perhaps the most wonderful creature of all of God's creation, fell into sin, being deceived by his own wisdom and beauty. The Bible tells us that he had instigated and led a rebellion in heaven. His end has already been determined. The word has gone forth out of the mouth of God, and his enemy has already been sentenced to eternal imprisonment. The radiant cherub in all his glory, glittering on his outside, with every precious gem being his covering, will eventually be destroyed, but will never cease to exist. For references, you may look in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 16 through 17, Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, Psalm chapter 74, verses 13 and 14. Now, as Lucifer was once overthrown long ago when he had first attacked the heavens, which act resulted in causing the annihilation of the pre-Adamic earth, so likewise God shall again arise, and Lucifer shall again be cast down. For it is written that God himself had once broken Rahab's heads, but these heads somehow have grown back, as is revealed within the myth of Hercules. And we see again in Scripture, Psalms chapter 89, verse 10, and Revelation chapter 13, verse 3 through 4. And although the enemy was scattered from before the presence of the Lord, he had been allowed to regather his armies and regroup his forces. The enemy fully intends to again wage war against the throne of heaven, using all the strength that he has within himself, combined with the forces of his legions of armies which have gathered themselves to him. We should not be asleep or ignorant of his power, his devices, or his intentions. Satan, together with all of his companions, does surely intend on winning the great war. Even now, Satan continues to gather another host of angels, while encouraging the human inhabitants of this earth to join his forces. While his threats against heaven are without doubt a reality, and certainly nothing to be taken lightly, Satan shall without question be utterly and absolutely defeated, for he shall be cast down to the ground, as easily as one might swat down some annoying fly. This is, of course, from God's perspective. It would seem that God only allows Satan to continue that he might somehow make use of the situation at hand to thoroughly test and purify mankind. We can be assured that in spite of all of his planning and all of Satan's efforts to dethrone God from his throne, all this shall be in vain. The real danger is in the deception that engulfs and swallows semi-innocent victims, whether they are angelic or human. For he is a liar and the father of it, and those lies are aimed at men and meant to deceive them. Now, although we cannot see Satan, we can certainly see the results of his lies and the impact that it has had upon mankind. But many believe his lies, and as a result will be swallowed up as if in a whirlpool at the end of the age. In all this, however, we who are upon the earth may find a certain amount of relief and comfort. For the Bible declares that when Satan launches his final attack against heaven, he shall be utterly cast down, cut down as in the days of old. We see it in Isaiah chapter 51, verse 9. God need only mention the name of his enemy, and he shall discover them that are on his side. For God's people rejoice in the breaking of the dragon's heads, and they take great delight in being called his people. Again, I point you to Psalm chapter 87, verse 4. Now in this zodiac of Dendera, the constellation Perseus appears with some sort of animal in submission to him. Now in all probability this animal is Pegasus, which is also represented below the animal who appears without a head. The symbolism of Pegasus having no head might well be interpreted as the chief of all horses having no head over him, or rather cannot be tamed by any man. As Perseus appears, we see Pegasus has willingly submitted himself under his authority. In the more common representation of the constellation, Perseus can easily be identified with the Persian Mithras. He is usually imagined as wearing a helmet upon his head and having wings upon his feet. These wings give him the ability to ascend into the sky. Such is the same way in which Jesus left the earth when he was upon it in Acts chapter 1, verse 9, although we didn't see any wings on his ankles. Perseus bears a great sword in his right hand, while he holds the head of the Gorgon Medusa in his left. His Hebrew name is Peretz. The name means the breaker. The bright star in his left foot is named Afik, which means he who breaks. In the Egyptian zodiac of Dendera, his name is Karknem, whose name means he who fights and subdues. He is without a doubt the promised Messiah who must come to subdue the creature Cetus. Now in the Greek, this Messiah is called Perseus, which is of course his more common name. The star in his waist is called Merphach, which means who helps. He is the one who comes forth to assist the chained virgin Andromeda, who is about to be devoured by the great sea serpent. In his right shoulder is a star named El Gened, which means who carries away, for he shall carry away the virgin to a place of safety. And all the while he holds in his left hand the head of Medusa. Throughout the Christian church, there's the common teaching of the snatching or carrying away of the bride, that is the church, with the marriage of the Lamb to his bride shortly following thereafter. While some continue to teach that this event was a truth or mystery somehow hidden by God, who can doubt that we find this teaching here, before us, already written in the stars of long ago, for all to see and know? Paul never did suggest that the snatching away of the bride or the taking of a wife or a son was a mystery hidden in God. The mystery was that both Jew and Gentile should now become one new man, and that the bride should also become one nature with God himself. It is clear when we look at the pageant of these heavens that Perseus, standing beside Andromeda, who is chained, ready to be devoured by the monster Cetus, it is Perseus who saves his bride. We might further show how this same story is also proclaimed among the ancient Egyptians. As within the Greek myth, Danae and Proteus are the mother and the father of Perseus, and these also might easily be identified with Isis and Osiris, who are said to be the parents of Horus. It is interesting that Horus is regarded as the incarnation of the sun god, for within the Greek myth it is Zeus himself who impregnates Danae by a golden shower, which is commonly said to indicate or represent a manifestation of the sun god. In the Greek myth, Acrisius, who would correspond to the Egyptian Set, who serves as a monarch over his kingdom, refuses to hand over the throne to his brother Proteus, who would correspond to the Egyptian Osiris, after his term of rule had rightfully expired. Does this not sound familiar with what we've already looked at in the previous study on constellation Taurus and his deacons? According to the prophecy that is received by Set, the son of Isis, whose name is Horus, whose father is Osiris, the brother of Set, shall one day take the life of the king of Set. Or let me say it this way. According to the prophecy received by Acrisius, the son of Danae, whose name is Perseus, whose father is Proteus, the father of Acrisius shall one day take the life of the king. By doing so, this son, Horus, who is of Isis, would in this way regain the lost throne of his father, Osiris. From this comparison, we can see that Perseus actually represents, or at least can be identified with, Horus, the sun god. Now, it has long been believed and taught that the story of Andromeda and Perseus is merely a retelling, or it's another version, if you will, of the story that is also told of Marduk, who is again regarded as being the sun god. Within the scriptures, we are informed of a similar set of circumstances. We know that Lucifer was the original monarch ruling over the planet Earth. His kingdom and his dominion, which he had currently held upon the earth, also contained a day of expiration. It had been often rehearsed within his ears that there was coming one in the near future who would set up a kingdom to supersede his own kingdom and throne. Although we do not consider the Quran to be inspired, we are aware that Muhammad collected teachings that were current and known in his day to compile the story in the Quran. Now, this same Lucifer is called Iblis in the Quran, and it is not that we suggest that the Quran has any inspiration behind it. But it is, however, a collection or a written historical document that shows a connection here, which is why we refer to it. So this same Lucifer, again, who the Quran calls Iblis, he despises the very thought of this great one who was prophesied to come and take away his own throne. And as such, he absolutely refused to submit himself under the man. Such submission to man by the angels would imply that man could control the forces of nature, as it is the angels who have been given this great power over such natural forces. Now let's look at the Quran. The Quran, in the portion called the Cow, 2:34, reads, "And when we said to the angels, be submissive to Adam, they submitted, but Iblis did not. He refused and was proud, and he was one of the disbelievers." An interesting thing to bring up. This coming one, destined to replace him as king, was to be a mere man, a weak, fleshly creature being fashioned and made from the dirt of the earth itself. It is most interesting that the word Khalifa, an Arabic word meaning ruler or successor, you've heard of the Caliph. It means ruler or successor. It's used in the Quran to speak of Adam as being the one